So look, thanks for turning out this morning. First talk of the morning. Really appreciate it. My name is Michael Guerin. I'm CEO and founder of Imvizar. A little bit of context on who we are. We create location-based digital storytelling experiences all around the world. We have over 70 experiences in 6 countries. And we're here today to give you some context to them.
Great. And my name is Adele Keane. I'm the COO and Creative Director at Imvizar. And today we're here to talk to you about digital storytelling to create an emotional connection with visitors. So first of all, we'll chat a bit about why we're telling you this. So we're passionate storytellers, but it's also backed up by science. Antonio Damasio, he's a professor of neurology. His studies showed that humans do not remember content unless they engage with it emotionally. A quote that he came up with that we quite like is that humans are not thinking machines, but humans are feeling machines that think. And this really drives all the work that we do. So today we're going to chat a bit about what is digital storytelling, talk about some theory, and then get into some case studies to put that theory into practice. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A.
So for a little bit of context, these are some types of digital storytelling experiences that we have created in different locations around the world. They offer a transformative experience for the visitor through enhancing their engagement, but ultimately this happens because we drive an emotional connection with the story, place, and content. We've given the title of digital storytelling here, but I want to refine that a little bit further for you today. So we often refer to our stories as spatial stories. So to explain a little bit about what that means, a digital story can be something that's delivered as a video, as an augmented reality experience, a virtual reality experience, 360. Loads of different stories can be delivered digitally. But we also think the place is very important in the story as well. So telling a digital story in a place is a spatial story. And to give you a definition of that, spatial storytelling combines digital content with physical spaces to create immersive location-based narratives. So I'm going to kick off, as Adele mentioned, with a little bit of theory. So the 5 elements that enable you to create an emotional connection within spatial storytelling. As I mentioned, one of the most important is the location. So many of you will work in, I would imagine, pretty fabulous locations where a lot of incredible things have happened for many centuries, hundreds of years. Ultimately, we want people to feel a connection to that place. So the 2 examples you can see here, the one on the left is a poet who's buried in this abbey, and kids getting to meet the poet and hear his story. And then on the right-hand side is a house, Muckross House, where Queen Victoria visited. There was a postcard at this location, or a postcard written by Queen Victoria, which talked about the day that they were painting and sketching. So the lady of the house was painting and Queen Victoria was sketching. So we've recreated this scene in the location where it was likely to have happened. And what you're seeing here is a family standing between Queen Victoria and the lady of the house as they're painting and sketching the scene. So ultimately what we're trying to help people is to feel more of a connection to the place where these events may have happened.
So next on our list is visuals. So we create augmented reality visuals. A big thing we pride ourselves on is seeing is believing. The examples Michael gave there, you couldn't see anything in those pictures, but the visitors could. And they are reliving scenes that happened many, many, many years ago. For us, that is key to everything we do. However, how do we know that this evokes emotion? Showing people visuals tells you one thing, but seeing their reactions really says how they feel. So these are some examples of reactions of kids who are experiencing AR visuals at Spike Island, which is the case study we're going to discuss shortly. The child in the middle here is witnessing a recreation of the original Jack in the Box. A character pops out of a box and scares the child in a fun, playful experience. And I'm not going to lie, on the day we launched this, I stood in that room for 30 minutes recording many people's reactions. And each time, every single person was surprised, delighted, a bit scared. The 2 kids on either side are seeing a prisoner escaping from prisoner in a giant JCB. This is a really fun experience because kids get to see what looks like a life-size toy that they can actually go and interact with. So seeing their reactions of smiles, shock, laughter, sometimes a bit scared, really shows that these visuals are connecting with the visitors.
Yep. So the third important component here, and what differentiates this style of storytelling to video or even 360 or VR experiences, is the ability to move around the space, which is really, really important. So You could have a visual at a location, which is a video and a reconstruction, but enabling people to move around the scene, move around the JCB and the guy who crashed it through during the riot in 1980, moving around the scenes, enable people to give a sense, put them in the place where the stories existed, and give them a bit of agency to interact with the characters.
Yep. And just to add to that as well, we're currently working with a professor in Harvard who's trying to prove that kinesthetic learning through doing and movement, can work with augmented reality.
Yeah.
So the next part is interactivity. Once we have a location with visuals and the people moving around, it's great. But how do we get that next level to really get them to feel that they're a part of the story? Really getting it from being a passive story that's happening to them being an active participant. And we do this through interactivity. What does that mean? That means as the visitor walks around the room, different things respond to their presence. They walk up to a character and it starts to speak. They walk up to a car and it takes off. All of these things make them feel like their presence is actually there. Another thing in interactivity can be offering people multiple choice. They can decide who do they want to talk to, or they can decide where does that character go. And this really puts them in the story and puts them in the shoes of many years ago of what people felt like to live there. Then last but by no means least is sound. Sound is extremely powerful and has many ways that it can add to the emotion of a story. All of these elements above are the key foundations. However, if there's no sound, it can sometimes fall a bit flat. Sound can be anything from background music. It could be gentle piano music evoking a sense of calm. It could be the clip-clop of a horse down a street, alluding to the fact that this took place in the 18th, 19th century. It could be sound effects that when a character stamps their foot, you really hear them smashing on the concrete. So all of these elements together bring the AR visuals to life and allow the user to feel like they have more agency in the scene.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about one particular case study in today. So Spike Island. Has anybody ever heard of Spike Island before? A few people. So it always surprises me how few people have heard of Spike Island because it's such an incredible location. It's often referred to as Ireland's Alcatraz. It's a prison island off the coast of Cork in Southern Ireland. Within the fort walls is 8 times the size of Alcatraz Island, to give some context. It's a really incredible place. It was the biggest prison, or the most highly densely populated prison in the world in 1850. A really, truly incredible story. So for the last 600 years, it's switched between a military fort and a prison. What you can't see here, because it's from an aerial shot, is it's actually built on a very steep man-made hill. So prisoners at the time were forced to take earth from other islands and places and the land around and build a very high basically mound on top of the island on which the fort was built on top of. So this is actually the second version of the fort. So we have been working with Spike Island for the last couple of years. It's their current experience, to give a bit of context. When you get off the boat on the pier on the bottom right-hand side, they guide you along the pier. They walk you up the path. There's 4 or 5 stops along the path to give context to the people that lived on the island. One of them being Percy Fawcett, who many believe Indiana Jones is based on. And then you continue up the hill, and then they stop the guided tour at the front of the fort. And at that point, it's up for people to explore. So the challenge they had is, how can they guide people around the location in a more efficient manner? And then how can they bring the locations to life? A lot of these buildings are protected buildings for obvious reasons. They didn't want to install video and TVs in different locations, so they were trying to understand how could they bring the stories to life in the punishment block, in the children's prison. How could they recreate the stories in full life-size 3D? In particular, to engage with younger audiences, it should be said as well. Although we've had some very good experiences with over 60s groups that come up during the week and really enjoy it. So look, I'm going to talk through a couple of experiences now, and then Adele will talk through 2 after. So I'm going to play a video of an experience first, which is a screen recording from our phone, and then I'll talk through it a little bit. So hopefully you can hear this as it plays. Please let me know if you can.
Prisoner 958. You have been sent here because you have broken the code of silence. On the 12th of April, in the year of our Lord, 1862, you were apprehended attempting to speak to another inmate. The Spike Island Code of Silence is in place to prohibit prisoners from ever conspiring with each other. You will now be sent to your punishment cell.
Next stop on the Spike Island experience is the punishment.
So, to give a bit of context to that, in this location, if I go back here, in this location, so to think about the 5 elements, this is actually the prison guard's room. This is as you enter the punishment cell. This is the desk and chair that the prison guard would have sat on. The fire would have been lit. So the location is the location he would have sat. The visuals is what he obviously looked like, and the fire lit. In terms of user movement, the user can move all the way around the scene. They can go behind him. They can see the fire. In terms of interactivity, this scene is triggered based on the user or the visitor entering the prison guard's room. So as you walk in, the prison guard appears, and as you get closer to him, then he turns around and starts waving his baton at you. And then the last really important piece, especially given the next story, is the sound. So you can hear the crackling of the fire. It gives a sense of warmth when you're in the space, and it's a stark contrast from the conditions that this prison guard had versus the guy who's in the punishment block, which is the next story. So I'm going to play the next one, and then I'll talk a little bit about it.
Oh, I can smell the fresh air on your clothes. It's summertime, isn't it? I'm trying to keep track of the days. It was April when I entered this hellhole, and I think it's June now.
So in this scene, and it doesn't even really look it in the video, but this is a really, really grim location. It's really damp. It smells really bad. There's no daylight. There's a light on in the room at the minute, but there was no light. So these prisoners were chained to the wall for 23 and a half hours per day and blindfolded. This gives, again, in the location it actually existed, gives a sense where you can interact with all of your senses. You get the smell of the location. You can hear the sound and the water drops. It, again, is triggered based on proximity. So ultimately what we're trying to do here is help people feel a connection to the place and to the story. The very first day we launched this, I was standing outside the punishment block, and I gave the phone and the iPad to 2 ladies, and I said, would you like to try this experience for the first time ever, other than us? And this... I gave them the phone and the iPad. They then came back out and they were crying, which I think that was a good thing. But one of them said to me that she has walked around the prison for the last 2 hours and she had never thought about the human impact of the location and the conditions of the space. And this is ultimately what we're trying to deliver. You can walk in and out of all these cells and not really think about what it was like for the person, but combining the 5 elements we talked about, it enabled this lady to really feel a sense of what it was like for people in this space.
Great. So I'm going to show another example now. I'll play the video first. This is the children's prison in Spike Island.
Reading the records of these boys' crimes and misdemeanors is heartbreaking. Many were convicted and sent here for simply being homeless, as that had been deemed a crime. David Doran was only 12 when he was sent to Spike for stealing a pocket watch. He was lashed on arrival and put into this block. He died here just 6 months later. Edmund Power was so brutalized by the system and the whippings he endured that he went on to be convicted of the murder of one of Spike Island's prison guards.
So to talk through this scene, the first time I visited Spike Island and saw this big empty room, I didn't think much of it until the tour guide told me that this was previously the children's prison. There was up to 50 children as young as 11 years old that lived in this room. They lived in awful conditions. They had nothing. A lot of them were sent to Australia and died on the way. It was really, really a harrowing, grim place. However, at Spike, because they can't install infrastructure in this room, there's a small plaque outside the room that says this is a children's prison and no other information is given. So what we did was we looked at this space and said, how can we recreate it? So based off archival diary entries, we recreated this space. There was hammocks hanging from the ceiling, so when the visitor walks around, they can move their phone and see all these elements come to life. They can see children playing, which is kind of us trying to evoke the innocence of the children, that even though that they're in prison, they're still children. They're playing games. They're playing with shoes instead of footballs, playing with rocks instead of marbles. And then this young boy recounts his story of how he's most likely going to be sent to Australia and may or may not survive the trip. In terms of this with sound design, There's music playing, which is quite evocative and trying to get the user to really think of this in like a cinematic experience and how these stories of the children are forgotten in history. We also have narration in this one. So instead of the child just talking the whole time, a narrator is explaining the different things that you're seeing. But ultimately, once again, it's making seeing is believing, but tying that in with some sound effects and bringing the location to life. The next example I'm going to show is not so harrowing. So Spike Island was a very grim place for many, many, many years. But in the year 600 AD, long before it was ever a military fort or a prison, it was actually a monastery and it was a peaceful place. So I'll play this video first and then talk through this experience.
Finding sustenance from the land and sea, and spending time in quiet worship and contemplation. Our flock is 40 strong now, and it's time for me to go forth and start.
Outside the fort of Spike Island, there's a big empty field. And in the year 600 AD, this was a monastery. Nothing remains of it today. So we recreated the entire monastery using augmented reality. The visitor can walk up to all of these different buildings, enter into the chapel, enter into the huts, and see the farm animals. They can also hear a story from Saint Makuta, who was the monk who lived here. This is a really peaceful experience. It's separate from the big hill and the big fort. It's down by the coast. There's a beautiful view over Cove and the harbour. And it really is a peaceful meditative moment for visitors to realise that this place has a really long history. And over the course of 2,000 years, it went through many, many, many different stages.
Yep. So that's 4 examples from Spike Island. You'll notice in these, in all of these examples, there were characters. Many of them spoke to you. Some of them we used narration. This is just one style of storytelling that we can do and that you can do whenever you're building a digital story. So we're going to give one example, which isn't Spike Island now. Adele's going to talk through how we create the experience and give a bit of context to the different style.
So we were working with a client in Sydney, Australia, and there's a place called Cumberland Steps, which is a heritage site. It's in an area called the Rocks, which in the early 1900s was the slum area. So people lived in squalor. Much like in Spike Island, a lot of these artifacts don't remain today. However, there are a lot of archival images because it was in the 1900s. There is this image that was taken at these exact steps. So you can see here, the steps here are the exact same as those steps there. You can even see that same door still remains. So this image is currently on a small plaque beside the steps. So as visitors walk by, they may or may not see that image. They may or may not read some information. So we knew we wanted to do something in this location, and this was our reference for the visuals. And we really thought about it. How can we make people feel connected to this photograph? How can we allow these people's stories come to life? So our idea was we want people to jump into this photograph. If I could literally right now dive into that screen, how could we do that? So we started doing mock-up images as we always do, trying to play around with different ideas. How could we overlay that image in the space? And then we started thinking about user movement. Where do we want the user to go? Because the different people are all up the steps, we were like, could actually people walk up the steps and look around them and be inside the photograph? And that's exactly what we did. So what we did was we ended up editing the photo to crop all of the different children and adults out of the picture and enhance them to make them higher quality. And we placed them all along the steps. To take this a step further, we actually allowed the user to walk fully through the scene. So I'll show you a video now. We don't need sound on this one. So the user actually sees a life-size version of the photograph appear in front of them. And as they walk into the photograph, their phone screen turns into black and white, and it feels like they have literally stepped into the photograph. And this allows people to actually get up close to different parts of the photograph and look at details. You can see that none of the children are wearing shoes. All the women are dressed in rags. They have dirt on their face. And it allows you to really think of who were these people and what were the conditions they lived in. And the narrator is explaining how these people lived in such squalor and awful conditions, yet they're the people who paved the way for what Sydney is today.
Great. Thanks, Adele. So I'm going to conclude as a brief recap on the 5 elements we mentioned earlier. So location is super important to give the user an opportunity to relate to the content and to give them proximity to the location where these events actually occurred. AR visuals are super important. You can't have the locations without some kind of visual, and ultimately seeing is believing. User movement gives the user and the visitor choice and agency on how they want to follow the story. Some of our stories are linear, where you have to go from one to the next. We also have stories where you can choose what direction you go. So often when you have a stately home or a location such as a stately home, you often hear about the lord and lady of the house, but you might not hear about the people who worked in the kitchen or the gardener or the farrier or whoever else worked there. Some people want to hear those stories more than the people that lived there. So how can you give the visitor the choice to determine what stories they want to hear. If I want to go into the kitchen, hear the sounds of pots and pans banging and the mayhem of people cooking versus the tranquility of the banquet room with the lord and lady sitting at the table. So we like to give the user that option. The interactivity is obviously super important to give a personalized experience. So you can have interactivity based on how close you get to something by tapping it, by moving the device around, and trying to get that connection again makes people feel like they're in the story themselves. And then sound is really important. So what you have here is smell and sight being delivered. Smell and what did you discuss there?
You've got the location, so
Yeah.
actually being able to touch and feel the prison cell and smell it is already there.
Yeah.
What we're adding is both the sight, being able to see what isn't there, and being able to hear what isn't there. So recreating those two senses that are absent.
Yep. And ultimately, this enables the visitor to feel empathy. I'm going to conclude on this last bit, just to recap again. A digital story is is a wider thing. What we focused on today is a spatial story. So that's a digital story in a place. So that combines digital content in a physical space to create an immersive location-based narrative. So we're going to finish up there. Thank you very much for listening. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much. If anyone does have, we're going to open the floor to any questions. If anyone does have any, if you could just raise a hand and we'll get a little microphone ushered over to you.
Yep, there's one there.
And yes, just down here in the middle, someone's coming with a microphone. Oh,
Hi guys. Thanks for a great presentation. Just quickly, where do you see this going next? As obviously it's moving very, very quickly. First question. And second question is, what about the data? So Spike Island, so some of us have very large districts and things
Yep.
we take care of. How can you use that big data from all those experiences to work out how to edit or amend the experience?
So we're actually looking at that at the minute. So in terms of where it's going, obviously, I mean, you see a lot of things around here and a lot of trade shows you go to. There's people with headsets. It may get there, but ultimately we're trying to deliver experiences for 99% of people that turn up to an attraction. So we are working with a number of headsets, including the Apple Vision Pro at the minute, to see how we can deliver experiences. That will definitely be a very premium experience, but for most, like, they're €4,000 per headset. So, for most attractions and locations, that's a bit beyond the budget. So we are working with them. I think it will get there. I think headsets will get lighter and we'll probably get there. But in the interim, what we've got to do is utilize the devices people have in their pockets. So we focus really heavily on a bring your own device policy so that locations and attractions don't have to maintain, clean, and manage devices. In terms of analytics then, so we have a full analytics platform for all of our attractions. So you can understand how people are moving through the location. Are they doing it stop 1, 2, 3? Like Spike Island, you don't really have to do them in order. So what order are people doing them? Should we shift the order? Should we move locations around? We're actually in a revamp of Spike Island at the minute. We're moving through the locations based on the analytics that we got from the platform. We can also then do dwell time and understand how many people are, which stops are being used, how long people are staying in the stories for. So that's 2D analytics. The next level is spatial analytics. So we're exploring at the minute, and we will hopefully have it early next year, where we can understand where the user moved within the scene. So if you have the children's prisons as an example, when you enter the room, little Timmy is the story to the right-hand side. So does everybody just stand there and look at little Timmy, or do people walk around the boys playing the football? In St. Macuda scene, do they walk up to the church in the monastery? Do they walk in and out of the buildings? We don't really know that at the minute, but we're working with a company at the minute to build in spatial analytics. So we'll have heat maps of each of the scenes to see which is the most popular and where people are moving. Because then ultimately, if in St. Macuda scene we know nobody's entering the church, we put a lot of effort into the inside that church looking really good. So we want people over there. So we need some triggers to encourage people to move there.
I have 2 small points to add on that.
Yep.
Just in terms of where is it going, accessibility and personalization are 2 other things. So making, as Michael was saying, we use devices that are pretty much AR friendly, so accessible to all, but constantly trying to make sure things can be translated into as many languages as possible, having subtitles, narration, anything that allows it to be more accessible, things being able to work offline. So a lot of those features we have, and we're constantly adding more and more things to make sure it's accessible to the widest range of an audience. Another thing in terms of where things are going is people want more personalized experiences. So as we touched on, agency is really important, of the visitor being able to move their phone around, make choices. But the next level is how can we get that even more personalized? For example, when you meet that prison guard guard that he can actually say your name and it sounds like it's his voice. So AI is a big trend at the moment, and people are trying to weave that into historical narratives, which at the moment can be a bit dangerous, because if it gets it wrong, then that ruins everything and takes you out of the context. So I do see it going there in the future of people having more personalized experiences, but like that, always making sure that it's still getting the message across and not becoming a gimmicky experience, but staying true to like the heritage and culture of the stories we're trying to tell.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Was there another question on the floor? Oh, one behind me.
Hi, thanks very much. Really interesting. And I love the idea of stepping into the photo. I think that's fantastic. Be able to kind of walk around it. A little question about, and also the idea of using people's own mobile phones. I think is great in the sense that it's a kind of collective experience. I suppose a family can all look at the same screen, as opposed to, of course, once you're in some sort of headset, you're on your own, and that's always a problem for heritage spaces. A little question about sound. If you're dealing with phones and things, I suppose you've got sound coming out of the phone speaker.
Yeah.
And how did you find that with kind of pollution of spaces, in the sense of that kind of sound being if it got more than one user or something in a space at one time?
Yeah, so we, to be honest with you, presumed it would be more of a problem than it panned out to be. So people can use headsets, and actually if they use headsets, there's spatial audio built into it. So if you're using AirPods, there is spatial audio there. 90% of people don't use headsets. They just have their phone or whatever device they have. And actually, it doesn't really interfere. It's a very personalized experience. So as an example, in the children's prison, you would presume within a room like that has nothing to absorb the sound, that the sound would bounce around. But we've had 10, 15 people all in there doing the experience, all at different times, all on their phone, not interfering with each other. So it doesn't really, it hasn't proven to be an issue to date,
Another important thing as well is that we never give instructions via sound only. So if the visitor is told you have to walk over here to make something happen, a message will come up on the screen so that they don't miss any cues.
Yeah.
So all those things, if they had earphones in and can hear every single word, it can add to the experience. But if they don't have that, it won't take away from it. They won't miss out on important instructions.
Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Got time for just one more? Just handing you across. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. For the deaf community, have you considered sign language on any of your tours?
So we're exploring a number of accessibility options at the minute. So we've built in subtitles or closed captions on our experiences going forward. Really, the balance in all of this is how the challenge with augmented reality, to be honest with you, is you need a lot of the screen to deliver the experience. So anything on top of the screen, it becomes very cluttered. So what we need to understand is sign language on screen at the same time as the visual the right way to do it, or what is the best way to deliver the experience? I'm not sure anybody's really nailed it yet, but we're exploring it with a number of our clients at the minute to see how best to deliver it,
I think with the deaf community, to actually see visual,
Yeah.
like everyone watched the Eurovision Song Contest,
Yeah.
but it just makes it more personal.
Yeah. It's very, very possible for us to do that. All of the requests to date have been for closed captions, but I mean, sign language is definitely possible. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to have to leave it there, but I'm sure these guys will be around if you've got any more questions for them.